Hello, how's it going? In this video, I'm going to be walking you through the process of painting a Scourge Corruptor Hive ship from Dropzone Commander. So it's pretty straightforward, but I think we should start off with just getting the model out of the packaging and ready for painting. So got my packaging here. Let's just get it open and see what we're working with. Let's see here. All right, so got here are our main pieces. Enough to build two, but we'll largely focus on painting one. So sometimes, well, not sometimes, these are cast resin models. And the problem with those is that they are coated with a mold release chemical, which is what gets them out of the mold cleanly and easily after they've been spun cast and the polymerization process is complete. The problem with the coating is that it can be difficult for primer or paint to stick to it, and so you need to clean them off. That's easy enough. You just use some standard dish soap and water. So I like to soak them for a little bit in there, but you should just make sure the entire model gets soap on it. And use a toothbrush or whatever you have on hand. It doesn't take too much. You just need to make sure you clean it off thoroughly enough that there isn't any residual mold release agent in there. So let's get that taken care of. All right, I've taken this outside because we're going to be moving on to the next step, priming. We are jumping ahead just a little bit in that it's good to decide what paint scheme you're going to be doing before you decide how you're going to prime the model. We haven't talked about that at all, and that's probably the most important step of all of this. But I am confident in that I can just have a pretty standard job and go from there in terms of color selection and whatnot. I'm going to be doing a zenithal technique, which is where you paint all around black and then spray from white down directly on top. So we are outside, of course, because we're going to be spray painting, spray priming to be more specific. And safety first, you always want to be in a well-ventilated area when using this stuff. If you can't, you can do brush primer. Spray is typically going to do a better job in terms of getting you a nice smooth finish, but work with what you got. It's better than compromising your health by breathing in a bunch of particulates and aerosols and whatnot. So first it's black, then white from above. Yeah, looking good. Let's get that zenithal. Oh yeah, excellent stuff. Great. All right, now we'll let those dry, and then we will move on to the actual painting process after we talk about color and scheme selection. So, the choice of scheme. First, I recommend just taking a look at the model and understanding what sort of inspiration the design may have had. These have a definite biological influence. In such a case, perhaps going to the source could prove quite helpful. I don't think that'll help us here. The colors could do it, but the form doesn't align. While the scourge parasite itself has the flowing tendrils and thin membranous structures of a jellyfish, the vehicle is a much more rigid and defined structure, so trying to translate the appearance of the creature to it isn't going to be the best approach. Perhaps we can instead look at creatures that better approximate the vehicle, something with a more prominent endoskeletal structure, for example, but I think we got to change our thoughts here. Don't be afraid to take a step back if some approach isn't getting the results that you are trying to work towards. Painting is, of course, not simply a matter of learning the technical approaches and how one can apply a range of pigments and solvents to all sorts of media. With this, we're not presented with the endless possibilities of a flat blank canvas, the thing that most likely comes to mind when people think of painting. What we have is something that is meant to be a representation of a physical form that truly exists and operates within a, albeit fantastical, reality, but also has a clear lineage of design influences from our real world. In order to best consider how we're going to paint this, we need to understand that aesthetic ancestry. The primary designer of the Drop Commander universe is a man by the name of Dave Lewis. He's discussed the inspiration for the different factions in the games throughout the years, though I imagine for most it isn't really too difficult to figure it out. The Scourge, of course, draw a heavy inspiration from H.R. Giger, best known for his work on the seminal film Killer Condom. His work is characterized by a blending of the mechanical and biological with a strong insertion of sexuality. I'm not sure that last factor is going to be reflected too heavily in this fairly straightforward military sci fi setting, though. But that's just the obvious. We're not going to bring out the character of the piece with that alone. Further historical influences and context could prove useful, and so let's dig down at least one more level from Giger and explore some of the works and concepts espoused by his artistic influences. Giger's work was in the realm of surrealism. As an example, I would imagine the most famous artist of that school being Salvador Dali, who of course had a definite impact on Giger. Let's take a quick look at some of the ideas being explored by other surrealists that inspired him. We start with Ernst Fuchs, and a quote from the artist. Not seldom, I get into trance while painting. My state of consciousness fades, giving way to a feeling of being afloat, like a medium, and being led and moved by a safe hand, doing things I do not know much about consciously. This condition lasts for hours. Afterwards, everything I did in this time seems to me as someone else would have done it. Another Austrian artist, Wolfgang Paulin. After joining the Paris Surrealist group alongside his wife, Alice Rohn, in 1935, Paulin was struck by the creative possibilities of automatism, performing actions without conscious thought. The German artist, Max Ernst, developed a technique known as frottage, which involved rubbings and was intended as a way to discover unexpected designs independent of the artist's intention. I think you may be noticing a particular idea in common among these artists. Returning to Giger, he too embraced that concept of allowing the unconscious to drive the work in an automatic fashion. Giger maintains that he opens the door to his unconscious mind by confronting a blank canvas and suspending conscious thought. Then, as the spontaneous images start to build before his eyes, he adds details and textures with his airbrush. So now that we have a fuller picture of the artistic lineage of this piece, I think there is a more clear path ahead for us concerning the paint scheme and process. What the model itself does in the game is the final piece that we should incorporate. The specifics of the rules aren't important, but the concept of how it operates is. The Corruptor hive ship forcibly ejaculates worms into structures, impregnating them with parasites. The link between parasites and behavioral modification is a fascinating field of study, and I think with that concept in mind, we've now reached an understanding of how to paint the piece. We'll have to embrace the automatism of surrealism, of the behaviors of one being driven by the whims of an unconscious that's been hijacked, in this case, by a deeply embedded neuroparasite, surrendering as much of the process as possible from conscious decision. To begin, we need a way to select the colors that we're going to be using in a way that incorporates that unconscious behavior. And I can think of no greater parasite upon humanity than, of course, capital. The Dow, the S&P 500, and the NASDAQ indexes will serve as the seeds of our random color generation. Colors in computing are defined by using three 8-bit values of R, G, and B that are typically expressed as a combined hexadecimal value. I'll help the performance of each of the three stock indexes on a particular day seed a respective RGB value to get my final color selection. We're going to go with 3 colors in total, which is just an arbitrary decision, in order to get the 3 days that will get my seeds for my color generation values. I'll reference the background story of the setting. May 3rd, the day the Scourge conquered humanity. June 6th, the beginning of the reconquest of the now Scourge-occupied systems. And February 7th, the day the Bioficers first openly communicated their sporting intent to humankind. With that, we now have our color selection in dark purple, cyan, and a grayish blue. I'll use what I have for the best approximation of those colors. As for the actual application process, I think I may have an idea on how to really incorporate automatism. Drawing from the technique of frottage developed by Max Ernst, in which rubbings are made by placing paper on a textured surface and marking it with some kind of drawing tool, we're going to utilize this box, some soon-to-be paint-covered bits of paper towel, and of course the model itself as almost our rubbing tool. By randomly shaking the box and seeing what happens, we'll get our results free of any conscious influence. So as you can see now, we have our dark purple, our grayish blue color, and our cyan/teal. I've put a piece of tape on the paper, and we're going to get these into the box, tape them to the edges, the sides that is, pardon me. We want to work fairly fast here so the paint doesn't completely dry, although that will maybe work okay if we consider it something of a dry brushing in a way. Get those in there. We'll get our model in. Close this up, and we will shake. All right, let's see what we got here. Not very much, and that's just what we're going to have to accept because that is what the random shaking has decided. You know what? Let's just dump more paint in here and give it another shot. I feel like we could do better than that. Just dump some purple right in there. It's got a bit of cyan or teal on there, so I think we don't need any of that. Let's just add some of this grayish color. And then the blue that I mixed it with to make it a little darker, just throw right in there. Boom, done. Now, let's give it another go. God. There we are. I think we've got our other colors on there now. And here we are, a Corruptor hive ship, uniquely yours and painted to perfection. By following this simple workflow, you'll have your forces ready for battle in no time. Thanks for watching.